Today I'm going to show you guys how to brew a California common beer. This is a beer that was brought back by Anchor Brewing Company. You may have heard of their beer Anchor Steam, which is a really good beer. It's kind of like a hybrid, not exactly an ale, not exactly a lager. And although I'm not going to try and clone a beer, I'm going to try and brew the same style, and I made up my own recipe. And the recipe that I have, I'm going to be using Mutton's Extra Light DME. I wanted to use Golden Light DME, but there wasn't any available at the store when I went, so I just stuck with Mutton's Extra Light DME. Shouldn't make that big of a difference. And then in my specialty grains, I have half a pound of Caramel 60 Lovey Bun, which is more of the intense caramel, the true caramel flavor on your malts. I have a Victory malt, that's going to be a quarter pound, and some Carapils American Dextrin malt, which is really just to increase the mouthfeel of the beer. That's also going to be a quarter pound. Now for hops, I'm going to be using half an ounce of Northern Brewer hops. Got some leftovers here. And then I'm going to be using Simcoe pellets. The way I'm going to do these is Northern Brewer are going to be added first wort hop, and then Simcoe I'm going to be adding half an ounce 45 minutes prior to the end of the boil, and then the other half an ounce I am going to add at flame out once I turn off the heat to the boil. And for yeast, I'm going to be using Y Yeast 2112, which is their California lager yeast. So to start off, I'm going to be steeping grains. It's a full pound, so I'm going to actually be using two muslin bags since I have them, and I'm going to be using a gallon of water. That's where we'll start off. Bring your temperature to right around 160 degrees. We're going to be steeping the grains at 154 degrees, give or take. And while this heats up, I got my muslin bags in here, which I boiled them to sanitize them. I'm going to get my grains, and once the water hits 160, I'm going to throw both of these in with the grains. Okay, so I went a little bit over 160, so I'm turning down the heat a little bit. I always like to control the temperature before I steep in, before I drop in my grains. That way I don't go over my actual temperature. And usually what happens is when you first drop in your grains, that drops about 5 degrees off your water. And if you leave your setting on high, a lot of times it takes a while for the thermometer to catch up to the actual temperature, and you may be actually dropping in your grains at a higher temperature. And when you do that, you can actually extract some harshness out of the grain husks. So as I'm looking right now, I turned off the heat when I was at 165, but right now the temperature is 170 degrees, even though I already turned off the heat. So it's important to control the temperature before you drop in your grains. Okay, now that the temperature has reached 160 degrees, then I'm just going to take both of my muslin bags with my specialty grains, and I'm just going to drop them in carefully, and I want to make sure that my temperature remains constant throughout the steeping process. Again, we're going to be doing this for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and rinse them off and start to bring our wort to a boil. As soon as you put your steeping grains into the pot, you may want to stir it just gently. You don't want to move around the bags too much. You don't want to squeeze the bags. You just want to get a little bit of movement in here to get some of those sugars extracted out of the grain bags. After 30 minutes, what we want to do is remove our pot from the heat. Put it out on the side here. And then we're going to take a strainer and we're going to place it on top just like that. Then what we want to do is grab one of the grain bags, place them on top in here, and we're going to be rinsing off to get as much sugar as we can out of them. I'm using about about a quart of water. I'm going to use half a quart for one bag and the other half for the other bag. Microwave the water to get it right around the same temperature of about 160 degrees, 155 degrees. There goes the first bag. Let's get the second one. All right. Both the bags are done. Now we're just going to get rid of this. And we're going to add a quarter of an ounce of Northern Brewer hops. Just like that. Okay. Bring this back up to the heat. Now that the grain bags are out of the water, you're okay to turn this up as high as you can. Bring it to a boil. We're going to be topping this with about 4 gallons of water, and as soon as we get this to a boil, we're going to start adding our DME. The beer's almost about to come to a boil. I can almost hear it, so it shouldn't be that long before it actually boils. Now, while I was preparing my hops and all that, I realized that I only had a quarter of an ounce of Northern Brewer hops as opposed to half an ounce, which I thought I had. So, since I only had a quarter of an ounce, I'm going to have to make a little bit of modifications on the spot for this beer. And what I was planning on doing is I was going to add my other set of hops, my bittering hops, Simcoe, half an ounce, 45 minutes. I was going to boil it for only 45 minutes. So instead, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to boil it for a full 60 minutes. And so the changes that I'm making shouldn't really impact the flavor of the beer too much. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to it, but I'm going to be adding the hops and then I'm going to be adding the DME as soon as this thing starts to boil. Okay, so our boil is pretty much started, so I'm going to go ahead and just start to add our hops. Again, this is a full half an ounce of Simcoe hops, and if you've ever smelled Simcoe hops, they smell really, really good. I just can't get enough. All right. Throw in that in there. Alright, so now that we have a rolling boil going on, I'm going to start slowly add my DME. Uy, la madre. Actually going to remove it off the heat since we had a pretty full pot. This thing will easily boil over. So you want to add it slowly, stir it. Moving the pot off the heat is the best thing you can do whenever a boilover is about to happen. Adding DME to hot water like this will tend to make the wort rise up pretty quick. So you want to add it slowly if you have a boil going on pretty much already. The nice thing about adding DME when the water's pretty hot is that it dissolves fairly quickly. It doesn't clump up like when you add it when it's cold. The drawback obviously is that boilovers are pretty easy to happen. So now that all my DME is in here, I'm going to bring the pot back here, and since I have a pretty full pot, I'm going to have to be really careful, make sure that this thing doesn't boil over. Again, we're only adding half of the DME right now. We're gonna add the other half 15 minutes prior to the end of the boil. So we're gonna control the temperature here. We're gonna make sure we have a slow rolling boil, watch out for boilovers, and then we're gonna go ahead and add the rest of our DME 15 minutes prior to the end of the boil. I have a total of about 4 gallons of water here plus a DME, so the pot is about 4.5 gallons full, and this is a 5-gallon pot, so I've only got a little bit of room to play with. So we'll see in about 45 minutes. Okay, so we've been boiling for 45 minutes now. Now that we have 15 minutes left in the boil, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the heat, and I'm going to remove the pot from the heat, and I'm going to finish adding the rest of my DME. So again, I only added the first bag, so we boiled with 3 pounds of DME, and now we're going to go ahead and add the remaining 3 pounds. Now remember, when you add DME to a hot wort like this, it can easily start to foam up, and it may want to boil over on you. So add your DME and stir. By now you should have a little bit more room to play with since we've been boiling and some of the water has boiled off. So it's not going to be as hard as it was when we first added the first 3 pounds. You also want to make sure you stir the wort as soon as you drop your DME. That way none of that ends up going to the bottom and sticks to the bottom, which will later scorch. So just stir, make a whirlpool, just add your DME. There we go. Now we'll put this back on the heat. Turn the heat back on. Make sure you stir. And remember that when you're adding DME, the DME takes up volume, so it makes your wort rise again, so you'll have a little bit less space, but it's not as bad as when we first filled up the pot with 4 gallons of water and the DME. If I were to guess, I probably have a little bit under 4 gallons of water left here. Okay, so now we're gonna boil our wort for another 15 minutes. Okay, so we boiled for 15 minutes after we added our last set of DME. And now all we're gonna do is we're going to turn off the heat for one, and we're gonna give it a quick stir, send this into a whirlpool. Doesn't need to be too vigorous, and place our cover. We're gonna remove our pot from the heat, bring it over to our ice bath, and then we're just gonna add ice and let this thing cool down. Once we've added all of our ice, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually come over here and throw in my thermometer, and I'm just gonna give it about 20 seconds or so, 10 seconds maybe, to check the temperature. And as soon as the temperature in here drops below 180 degrees, I'm gonna go ahead and add my last set of hops. Looks like we are good. So all right, so we've added our last set of hops, and now we're just gonna have to wait for this thing to cool down, and we'll be on to our next step. Okay, so we've been cooling down our wort, and it has reached yeast pitching temperature. So our next step is going to be to get this thing out of our ice bath. I'm gonna dry it, make sure none of this water drips into the fermenter whenever I'm adding all this into it, just like that. And now we're gonna take this and add it into our bucket. Remember, we only have about 4 gallons of water, so we have to top this off to 5 gallons. So right there we are at 5 gallons. And now what we're going to do is mix this up a little bit by pouring it back and forth from our bucket to our boiling pot. Now the next thing we're going to do is we have our starter, which we made around 3 o'clock yesterday. So it's been going on for about 23 hours. And if you look at it, you can see the CO2 going off. So it's pretty active. So what we want to do with this is we want to get rid of as much of the beer in here as possible and keep just the slurry. So you gotta decant this slowly, trying not to mix in the yeast with the beer. Okay, once you get to about that much, swirl it around to get all the yeast mixed in, and that's exactly what we're going to pitch here. Alright. There we go. Now we place our cover and we shake and we ferment. Okay, now to ferment our beer, I'm going to attach the thermostat to the side of my bucket. So we're going to start this at 58 degrees. When fermentation starts, I'm going to leave it for a day. The day after that, I'm going to move the fermentation up 1 degree to 59. The day after that to 60. And then right when I see airlock activity start to kind of wind down a little bit, I'm going to move it up to 62, and I'm going to finish right at 62. So that's going to be it. This should be this is going to be left in the primary for 14 days, and then we're going to bottle. Taste without.
It's a nice gold.
Thanks. So let me know what you think.
So just take a sip of the.
Sure.
Just go right in. That's very good. I'm trying to think my feedback here. I don't know. I really don't have any real criticism on it. It's the hop profile of it is really nice. I don't know. It's good.
Thanks.
Oh, that's good. It's got a citrus back to it. So yeah, I like that. It's not real. It's light on the front and it's got that citrus on the back, so it's pretty easy to drink.
It's like a modest pale ale.
Modest pale ale.
Yeah. It's got it's hoppy though.
Like just like
just randomly combine caramel, malt, hops, and you're fine.
right there. Let's do it.
All right, that's
one,
that.
we'll see. We're missing two.